So I was originally going to go with the old YouTube cliche of releasing a Christmas themed review like I did last year, and to be honest, I just really couldn't be arsed. I value my time too much these days to be playing god awful games for the sake of putting out a video. Plus, after I released my videos on WWF games for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, I have had a lot of people commenting on them videos asking for a video on the WWE games for the Game Boy Advance. So I feel I owe it to the ones asking for it, especially because of my absence on this platform this year. It's been a busy one to say the least, so take this as my apology to you along with my gift to you this year for Christmas. So here it is, WWE games released for the Game Boy Advance. I hope you enjoy. Jesus, it's been that long I can barely remember how I even structure these videos or what I said about the previous games on the Game Boy. I do remember them being horrendous for the most part though. Terrible graphics, terrible sound, terrible grappling mechanics, and really not having much to them. But I have high hopes for the Game Boy Advance. I should really stop having high hopes because I'm sure whenever I end up saying this they usually end up being crap, but we'll go with it anyway. I should mention I haven't played any of these before properly. I briefly remember playing WWE Road to Wrestlemania 18 in primary school, but I had the GameCube version of it so didn't think much of it at the time, so all this will be pretty new to me. So first up is WWF Road to Wrestlemania. WWF Road to Wrestlemania was released in November of 2001. Developed by Natsume, the same folk who developed the port of WrestleMania 2000 on the Game Boy Color, which if I remember correctly wasn't actually that bad. I mean, it's not a patch on the proper WrestleMania 2000 for the Nintendo 64, but it was probably my favourite WWF game on the Game Boy. It was also published by THQ. Upon starting the game, you get brought straight to the main menu. What, you thought we were going to be getting an intro? Are you crazy? It's an easy menu to navigate with some cool visuals in the background along with a steel cage effect. Let's jump straight into the action, but first we must take a look at the game's roster. And whoa, I'm pretty surprised by the size of this roster for a game on this system. You have 24 superstars to choose from. You have your usual suspects for the time with the likes of Stone Cold, The Rock, Triple H, but I like the inclusion of a lot of the mid-carder guys for the time like Taz, Raven and X-Pac. Also, some of the big tag teams for the time are included like the Dudley Boys, the Hardy Boys and Edge and Christian. Definitely a good selection, however I'm surprised they didn't include the likes of Booker T, Diamond Dallas Page or even Lance Storm, dare I say. I'd imagine it has something to do with timing limitations, but you'd think they'd make the most of some of the bigger guys they got from buying their opposition WCW earlier on in that very same year. I mean, the majority of 2001 in the WWF was made up of the WCW and ECW invasion storyline. Also, come to think of it, there isn't even any ECW guys here either. I mean, we do have Raven, but he jumped ship from ECW to join the WWF before Vince McMahon even bought ECW. Where's Tommy Dreamer? Or even Rob Van Dam? The game does have a decent sized roster, but I can't help but think it has the same problem that WWF Just Bring It had on the PS2, and that being an incredibly outdated roster by the time the game was actually released. First off, I do want to talk about the things I do like in this game, or at least gave me some enjoyment. The graphics. My first impression was that it's clearly a natural progression of WrestleMania 2000 on the Game Boy Color. Very similar layout in regards to the biorhythmic meter and all in presentation wise. However, with the Game Boy Advance being able to produce a lot more pixels on screen, it makes it look a lot sharper compared to WrestleMania 2000. One thing I didn't like about WrestleMania 2000 is that all the wrestlers appeared to look the same apart from having different coloured attire on. With WWF Road to Wrestlemania, they've managed to make each wrestler look distinguishable. I suppose the bigger the fan you are of wrestling, you'd be able to tell who's who by just looking at them. The fans at ringside look good, and yeah, just overall looks pretty decent, but not what I was expecting if I'm honest, which we will touch on later when I go over the next games on the system. Entrances. All wrestlers come out to their own original theme song along with their Titantron video. Now some of these are great, and some of them are absolutely hilarious. Entrances start with their video on screen along with their music, then it cuts to them at the top of the ramp doing a pose of some kind. The videos are more pixelated stop motion on the screen rather than full motion videos, but you can only do what the hardware is capable of, and to be honest, I think they've done a great job. The music on the other hand, well, I'll let you judge that for yourself. Now, it would be so easy and cliche of me to give the game's entrance themes absolute dog's abuse, but hopefully you know I'm fair on this channel and will only judge something for the limitations it was tied to at the time. I've got to give credit where credit is due. They've done a good job of making some songs sound better than others. For example, I think the APA theme song sounds good. Or even William Regal's theme. But listen to the X Factor's theme song.
Yo, you dealing with the X Factor.
I found it hilarious, but not as hilarious as Eddie Guerrero's theme song.
Latino Heat.
Like, what even is that? If they could get the "Yo, you dealing with the X Factor" sample in the X Factor's theme song, how couldn't they get that continuous, steady Latino Heat, Latino Heat for Eddie's theme? I guess we'll never know. So yeah, that basically covers the good parts I like from this game, or that I at least got enjoyment from, which only really leaves one thing for me to cover now, which I'd say is the most important for a game to be the slightest bit enjoyable, and that is the gameplay. The gameplay for WWF Road to WrestleMania is absolutely horrendous. Let me go over the basic controls first though. You have the D-pad to move your character. B button is used for kicks, you pin your opponent by using the L button, and you can run by using the R button. You can actually freely run in this by using the D-pad after pressing R instead of just running completely straight, which I thought was pretty cool. The A button is used for initiating a tie-up for a grappling move, and this is where it all gets a bit crap. The majority of the time when you tie up to try and pull off a grappling move, nothing happens. Or at least for 90% of the match it doesn't anyway. You'll find yourself tying up and either having the hold broken or end up being punched to the ground. So frustrating. Most of the time I just cheesed my way to victory by landing kick after kick after kick until my opponent was visually hurt, indicated by them holding their stomach area. When they get to this stage you can pretty much land any move you want using the grappling system. But by this point the match has already been won really, so what's the point? It does have some redeemable features in the gameplay department, like being able to flip an opponent onto either their back or their front, or being able to do moves from the top turnbuckle, and the inclusion of weapons are always welcome. And even how bad the majority of the gameplay is, it's always satisfying to be able to see your wrestler pull off their very own finishing move. It's just unfortunate the main aspect of a wrestling game, i.e. the grappling system, is so poorly executed, which really is a shame because the game has a decent amount of variety when it comes to content and its match types. You have gauntlet matches, Iron Man matches, King of the Ring tournaments, and inside exhibition mode this is further expanded with more match types like tag matches, triple threat, handicap, steel cage matches, and even a season mode. But unfortunately the grappling system just doesn't allow me to fully be able to experience all of this. Next! WWE Road to WrestleMania 18 was released in October of 2002, developed by Natsume and published by THQ. It is the first game on the handheld to go by the newly WWE at the time, who had dropped the F out of their name and replaced it with an E for entertainment, that very same year. Anyway, back to WWE Road to WrestleMania 18. Nice introduction and then you're straight onto the main menu, which is easy to navigate. This game has a roster of 15 wrestlers, which is a huge downgrade from the previous game which had 24, but it sure packs a punch. My main issue with the previous game was that by the time the game was released the roster was incredibly outdated, but with this, it fits the time frame perfectly. It of course has its main staples like The Rock, Triple H, Undertaker, etc, but now we have the inclusion of the likes of Booker T, Rob Van Dam, Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan. Entrances are included also, but they're a lot more dumbed down, just showing the wrestlers appear at the bottom of the ramp before they enter the ring with their music on top. Which, by the way, the music sounds fantastic in this. most notably Christian's theme song, which was one of my favourite themes during this period, and still to this day gets me pumped when it comes on my phone while I'm in the gym. The only wrestler's theme I thought sounded a bit off was Kane's. It just sounds like a really sad version of his theme song, if that makes any sense. But that is completely made up for once the bell finally rings. Before I get into the gameplay, I just want to address the visual overhaul in this game compared to the previous game. This is exactly how I picture a Game Boy Advance WWE game to look like. All wrestlers are digitized, so it's very easy to see who they are supposed to be, unlike most of the previous WWE games I have covered across these Nintendo handhelds. The on-screen HUD is a lot more cleaner than the previous game, with just one bar that fills up the more you pull off various moves. Now into the action. It's pointless me going over which button does what, as it's pretty much the exact same as the previous game, but I'm delighted to inform you all that it's had a massive upgrade and is now also very playable. Gone is the stupid tie-up system that leads to nothing happening, or having to spam your opponent with kicks just to weaken them to be able to pull off a single move. Now it's as easy as pressing the grapple button along with a directional button to pull off a move. Something this simple can drastically improve a game, and in return, it led me to have some fun with this one. It's slightly on the slow side when it comes to striking, but everything else seems to be on point. Each wrestler has their own set of moves different from one another, like you'll see Booker T pull off his running scissor kick, or Triple H's running high knee. It's little details that set each wrestler apart, which makes me want to play as each character the game has to offer, unlike the previous game where every wrestler pretty much had the same set of moves. I was able to have fluid wrestling matches without getting frustrated with the controls pulling off a variety of moves in each match. I had so much fun with this that I went through the game's story mode, or challenge mode as it's called in this. It's pretty short, but the gameplay kept it enjoyable. You pick a wrestler, and depending on if they are currently holding a title belt or not, you'll either defend the belt or work your way up to be able to be a contender for it. Like I said, it's pretty short, only offering a handful of matches before being completed, but I could have done with a more in-depth story mode rather than it being just a challenge mode with a few matches. With the game having such easy pick up and play controls, I was able to experience different match types on offer, like tag team matches, steel cage matches, triple threat, etc. that I wasn't able to experience with the previous game due to its horrible controls. The only thing that slightly annoyed me was when I was playing in a triple threat match. The game had a hard time registering me trying to stop an opponent covering someone, which resulted in me losing the match. Like, it worked there, so why didn't it work here? The game received mixed reviews on release, mainly stating the positives I've mentioned here, but personally it's been my favourite so far out of the two I've covered, and I'm actually looking forward to the next one now. Game Boy Advance players would have to wait 2 years for the next WWE game to be released on the handheld, and that came in the form of WWE Survivor Series, which was released in 2004. Developed by Natsume and published by THQ. Just by looking at the box art alone, you can see how different WWE was at the time compared to 2002. By this point, the two brands, Raw and SmackDown, had split, with each of them having their own unique roster. Finally, we have a proper intro scene to the game, and it looks good. It's given me Raw vs SmackDown vibes that was popping off on the PS2 at the time, or at least as good as a Game Boy Advance game could portray it anyway. The menu system and how you navigate it is the slickest I've seen out of these games so far. Let's take a look at the game's roster. As I said, the two brands Raw and SmackDown had split by this point, and people like The Rock and Stone Cold had moved on from wrestling, but the roster represents the time perfectly. The game gives you 8 wrestlers from Raw and 8 wrestlers from SmackDown to choose from. Crazy to see how fast times changed so quickly from the previous one, with the likes of John Cena, Rey Mysterio and Randy Orton now being playable characters. Definitely a good selection for the time, and a few that would end up leading the company for the years that followed. Before starting matches, I like how they'd show the wrestlers on screen with a backdrop of the arena you'll be fighting in, which they have a few to choose from, with the likes of Survivor Series, Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, etc. Unfortunately, the entrances are the same as the previous game, so you don't get to see the stage of the arena, but they have the aprons at least. As far as gameplay goes, there isn't much to cover which I haven't already. It's exactly the same as the previous game. Same controls, same moves. It's really just an upgraded roster from the previous game if I'm honest. At first I was kind of gutted by this, but when I thought about it, there really isn't much more they could have done with a WWE game on the system. I was pretty excited to see the inclusion of a proper story mode this time round, but that faded quickly. You pick a brand you want to wrestle on, then select a wrestler within that same brand. You get cutscenes, but I felt like I was being grilled each time I seen one of these. Eric Bischoff was informing me that I needed to make my matches fun for the fans, not to keep spamming the same moves along with a few other objectives, but for some reason no matter what I was doing I kept being told it wasn't good enough. I'm not going to lie, I didn't get far in this. Within my first 4 matches I had to wrestle Chris Jericho 3 times and that was enough for me. I understand they're limited to 8 wrestlers per brand, but facing the same guy 3 times out of 4? Come on. It's not a terrible game. Like I said, it's just a repaint of the previous one, but I think I was burned out from playing the last game for as long as I did for this, that I just couldn't be arsed pretty much playing the exact same game, but with just a different roster. I've got to say though, my favourite out of the 3 games was Road to WrestleMania 18. It was exactly what I was expecting from a WWE game on the system. I thought given the 2-year gap between the last 2 games they would have done something big with Survivor Series, but like I said, what more could have they done? I think a portable general manager mode would have been pretty cool, but they wouldn't have realised the success they could have had with it because that didn't debut in a WWE game until SmackDown vs Raw 2016 on the PlayStation 2, and that was brilliant. Come to think of it, that's exactly what they should have done for this. Take away all the playable matches, include a full roster, and have an in-depth portable general manager game. I think that would have been class, but it just wasn't meant to be, I guess. Anyway, that brings me to the end of the video. If you have enjoyed, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to my channel for more gaming content. If you have played any of these games yourself, leave a comment letting me know. I'd love to hear about your experiences with these titles. Have a great Christmas and a wonderful New Year, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!